Nobody says no to Adrian Koval in his own city, and New Orleans had been his city for 12 years. But Vera Tully looked at the cashier's check he'd placed on her compositing stone, $212,000, fully printed, made out to her name, and she slid it back across the zinc surface without a word. Koval's 3 men went very still. That stillness was what she would remember most later. Not the danger, not even the money. The specific quality of that stillness, 3 men in expensive wool forgetting to breathe because something had happened that wasn't in any script they'd ever run. The smell of the studio was ink and turpentine and old paper. The same smell Vera had grown up breathing, the same smell that had saturated her mother's hair and clothes, and eventually her hospital room from the wool cardigan she refused to stop wearing. November in the Marigny was 57 degrees and damp, the kind of cold that found the gaps in cypress siding and moved in permanently. The 1952 Chandler and Price platen press that anchored the center of the room had been running since 7 that morning. Vera was pulling a proof of a Thanksgiving menu order when the cars stopped outside. Not 1 car, 3. She could tell by the pattern of silence, the staggered cut of engines, too precise for a delivery, too clean for the bar crowd that wouldn't surface until well after dark. She finished the pull, set the sheet on the drying rack, and stripped off her gloves. Her hands were stained at the knuckles the way they always were by afternoon, a permanent grey-black that no amount of pumice got entirely out. She knew who it was. She'd been waiting 8 months for this particular knock. The paperwork had been in the bottom of her mother's filing cabinet, behind the 2019 tax returns. $190,000 borrowed from something called Meridian Capital Holdings, signed in her mother's careful, already shaking handwriting, 6 weeks before the 2nd round of chemo. Vera had spent 20 minutes reading the fine print before she understood that Meridian Capital Holdings was not a capital holdings company in any conventional sense. The interest rate alone told her that. The repayment structure confirmed it. Her mother had not told her. Her mother had also not survived the 2nd round of chemo. The knock came, 3 times even, unhurried, the knock of a man who didn't pace himself because he'd never had to. Vera opened the door. There were 4 of them, 3 in the back, broad, quiet men in dark overcoats with the particular stillness of people paid to stand in rooms and wait, and one in front who was not wide and not performing stillness, just occupying the doorway with the easy authority of someone accustomed to thresholds yielding to him. Koval was not what she'd expected. She'd built a picture from fragments, news articles about his import firm, a photo in a business journal, court documents that circled his name without landing on it directly. She'd expected something more theatrical, more gold watch, more obvious threat. He was about 40, maybe a few years past, dark hair going silver at the temples, a grey overcoat that fit the way money fits things, impeccably, without visible effort. His eyes were the shade of brown that reads as black in low light, and they moved across her studio with an appraiser's efficiency. The press, the drying racks, the drawers of hand-set type along the far wall, the stack of finished orders by the door. He wasn't looking for threats. He was taking inventory. "Mrs. Tully," he said. "Vera's fine." Something shifted at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile. "Koval," he said, offering his last name instead of his first. "May I come in?" She stepped back. He came alone. His 3 men stayed on the sidewalk, which she noticed and filed away. He stood in the center of the studio and looked at the Chandler and Price with the specific blankness of someone who'd never considered where printed things came from. He reached into his coat and set an envelope on the compositing stone. Thick, cream-colored, the kind of envelope that announced its own importance. "The original loan document," Koval said. "Your mother's signature. Principal plus 8 months of accrued interest, $212,000. He set the check beside it. "That covers it completely, clears the debt." She looked at the check. She looked at the number. $212,000 was more money than the studio would gross in 5 years at current volume. "In exchange for what?" she said. Not a question. He clasped his hands. I'm opening a gallery space on Magazine Street. Legitimate. I mean that specifically. Clean lease, clean building. I need a registered co-owner with a clean business record. Your name on the paperwork. 3, maybe 4 public appearances a year. Otherwise your life doesn't change. Your legitimate gallery that needs my clean name because yours isn't clean enough. A pause. That's one framing. What happens if it gets investigated? It won't. If it does. It won't, Vera. Yes or no? He studied her the way someone studies an instrument that's giving a reading they didn't anticipate. She'd been filed away as a known quantity in his head, and she'd just refused to fit. Your name would be on the paperwork, he said honestly. So I'd go down with it. Theoretically possible, he said after a moment. Vera picked up the check. She looked at her name on it. She thought about the final notice from the power company sitting on her kitchen table. She thought about the Chandler and Price needing a new roller sleeve at a cost she kept not managing to afford, and the 6 months of invoices in accounts receivable from clients who'd learned she wouldn't take them to small claims court. She slid the check back across the compositing stone. Koval stared at it. Behind him through the studio window, she could see one of his men shift his weight. The debt is real, Koval said. His voice had lost its evenness, just slightly. I know. You owe my operation $212,000. I've been doing your math since March, Vera said. I know what the VIG is. I know the compounding schedule. I know what happens when I can't pay. She looked at him steadily. I also know that if you were going to do something about that, you would have done it 8 months ago. You've been waiting, which means you need something specific from me, which means you don't have as much leverage as you're trying to look like you have. The silence that followed had a physical weight. One of the men outside moved toward the door. Koval raised 2 fingers. The man stopped. His eyes hadn't left Vera. She braced for the escalation, the version where politeness ended and the thing underneath it surfaced. Instead, Koval turned and looked at the press. He walked toward it slowly. He stopped in front of it. He looked at the platen, the flywheel, the open drawer of handset type she'd left out from the morning's work, a full lowercase alphabet in 18-point Caslin, sorted into their rows. What are these? He wasn't asking her specifically. He was just asking. Type, Vera said carefully. Metal. Lead alloy. Each block is a letter. You set them backward. The press reverses the impression when the ink transfers. Koval picked up a type block and turned it in his fingers, squinting at the backward character on the face. Hatch, he said. Yes. He set it down. He looked at the compositing stone, the zinc surface where she laid type in the frame before locking it into the press. He looked at the wooden tray. Show me how it works, he said. Vera stared at him. Excuse me. The press. Koval removed his overcoat. He folded it and set it over the back of the studio chair, with a deliberateness that felt like a decision rather than a gesture. He turned back and reached for his cuffs, began rolling his sleeves past his forearms. There was an old scar on his left arm, long and faded, the kind that came from something specific and survived. Through the studio window she could see his 3 men exchanging a look of pure professional confusion. You're not serious, she said. I'm always serious, which is why this is interesting. He was standing next to the type case now, looking at the letters with what she slowly identified as genuine curiosity, not performance, not a calculated move to throw her off balance. Something quieter and stranger than either. She should have told him to leave. She picked up a composing stick. She taught him the way she'd been taught, letter by letter, reading backward, right to left. He was clumsy at first, the way all beginners were clumsy, his hands too accustomed to handling things with authority rather than care. He dropped a full line of type twice, sending lead blocks scattering across the zinc surface. And she watched him pick each one up without complaint, squinting at the faces. Patience, she said once, before she could decide not to. I'm aware of my deficiencies, Koval said, without looking up. 20 minutes in, he told his men to wait in the cars. The largest one, Bran, she would later learn, stood in the doorway for a moment with the expression of a man watching a concept he didn't have the vocabulary for. Then the door closed, and it was just the two of them, and the smell of ink and the knock of the old pipes in the walls. "You don't have to keep doing this," Vera said when he'd been at the compositing stone for close to an hour, and his jacket sleeves were streaked with ink he'd transferred from touching the type. "I know." He was setting a line of text slowly, checking each letter. "Your argument was good," he said. "The one about leverage. Most people in your position panic first and calculate later, if at all." "My mother taught me the books before she taught me the press," Vera said. "She said a woman running any kind of business on her own needed to know where every dollar was at every moment. She said it was the only kind of protection she knew how to give me." She paused. "Except the one time she didn't tell me where a dollar went." Koval's hand stilled briefly. "She sounds like she was careful," he said. His voice was neutral in the way that people are neutral when they're being careful themselves. She was, except when she was scared. Vera leaned against the far table. She trusted a lender she shouldn't have trusted because the other options were worse, and she thought she'd fix it before it became my problem. She ran out of time. She hadn't meant to say all of that. It came out before the decision to stop it. Koval went back to setting type. "My father borrowed from operations like mine," he said after a while. He didn't look up. Different city, same arithmetic. He ran a wholesale grocery in Baltimore. Decent business, thin margins, one bad year. He took a bridge loan from the wrong source. The type block clicked softly into the stick. I was 15 when they came to explain the terms of the extension. They were thorough. Vera didn't say anything. "I decided that week that I was going to understand exactly how it worked," Koval said. "The math, the leverage, the compounding, all of it. I decided I was going to be the person who knew it better than anyone else in the room." He finally looked up, and his expression had shed everything she'd seen in it before. The controlled blankness, the appraiser's assessment. What was underneath was flat in a different way. Tired, maybe. "I'm not telling you this to explain myself. I just thought you should know that I did the math once, too. And it led me here." Vera looked at him steadily. "Does that feel like a good outcome?" He looked back down at the type, most days. She made coffee. She brought him a mug without discussing it, because he was still working, and leaving him unsupervised with her type cases felt wrong on instinct. He took it without looking away from the compositing stone. She leaned against the work table and watched him finish a full line, crooked, but all 7 words present and legible. He didn't revisit the debt, didn't mention the gallery or the check or the cream-colored envelope still sitting on the stone. He just worked. It should have been a manipulation. She kept waiting for it to resolve into one. She was still waiting when the door opened. She hadn't heard the car. The man who came in was not one of Koval's. She knew that in the first half-second, the way you know when something familiar in a room has quietly become something else. Maybe 30 years old, wearing a jacket that had been expensive 3 or 4 years ago. 2 men behind him, larger, with the barely contained restlessness of people looking for a reason. "Nice place," the first man said, scanning the studio in a way that had nothing to do with the press or the type or the drying rack. "Charming." He was looking at Koval. Koval had straightened up from the compositing stone without any particular hurry. He hadn't reached for anything. He stood with his ink-stained forearms bare and his jacket open, and he looked, not diminished, but different. Less like the man who'd walked through her door 3 hours ago, and more like something that had simply stopped making the effort to look like anything at all. "Pelano," Koval said. His voice had changed completely, quieter by several degrees, colder in a way Vera registered in her sternum before she registered it consciously. "You're a long way from your side of the river." "Word was you'd gone soft," Pelano said, "spending afternoons in a print shop." He glanced at Vera, "with the help." "I'm going to assume Jimmy sent you," Koval said. "Jimmy should have better judgment than this." "Market changes," Pelano said. with the shrug of a man who'd been waiting for a particular window and believed he'd found it. Man steps back from his post, somebody steps into it. That's how it goes. That's one version of how it goes, Koval said. Polano's hand moved. What followed was not a movie fight. It wasn't choreographed. It was approximately 3 seconds of organized violence from someone who'd learned it young and practiced it until it cost him no more thought than breathing. Koval moved left, closed the distance to the largest man before the man had processed that he was moving, redirected the man's forward momentum into the shelving along the wall. The crash of type blocks hitting the floor was catastrophic. A full drawer, hundreds of letters in every size, scattered across the concrete in an avalanche of lead. Polano reached into his jacket. Koval caught his wrist. Whatever Polano had been reaching for hit the floor. The third man looked at Koval, looked at the 2 on the floor, made a quiet arithmetic of his own. He walked out. Polano sat against the wall with his wrist at a wrong angle, breathing through his teeth. The large man was pulling himself out of the shelving with slow, inventorying movements. "Walk out," Koval said to Polano. His voice was completely level. "Tell Jimmy I was here because I chose to be. Not because I got distracted. Because I made a decision." He looked at the large man briefly. "Take him." It took them several miserable minutes. Vera stood at the coffee counter and didn't move until the door closed and the sound of tires on the street faded. Koval stood in the center of the studio. The cold precision drained out of his posture, and what was underneath looked like a man who'd spent something he wouldn't easily replace. He looked down at his hands. There was a cut on his right knuckle from the shelving, bleeding thinly over the ink stains. "That needs cleaning," Vera said. Her voice was steady. She was mildly surprised to find it was. "I have a doctor." "Sitting in a car 2 blocks away following your instructions," she said. She was already moving to the back room for the first aid kit. "Sit down." He sat, on the stool beside the press, hands in his lap, waiting. She'd expected resistance, to the word itself, or to the idea of taking instruction from a woman in a print shop, but he just sat. She cleaned the cut with what she had, iodine, gauze, a roll of medical tape. He didn't react to the iodine at all. She'd half expected that. "You didn't leave," Koval said while she worked. "It's my shop." Most people would have gone out the back. "I've been standing in this building since I was 4 years old. I wasn't going to run out of it because someone with bad judgment picked the wrong afternoon." She smoothed the tape down. "Also, you had it handled." He looked at her when she said that. She'd been focused on the bandaging, and she looked up to find his eyes closer than expected, the calculation in them replaced by something she didn't have a clean word for. Less like an appraiser, more like someone who'd expected a door to be locked and found it open, and wasn't sure yet what to do with that. "I brought that here," he said. "Polano brought that here. Because of me." Vera sat back and looked at the types scattered across the studio floor, months of careful organization undone in 3 seconds. The press was untouched. The cases could be reorganized. It was just time. "I've had tax collectors, inspectors looking for envelopes, a landlord who cut the heat in January to push me out," she said. "This is not the worst thing that's happened in this building." She paused. "It might be the most dramatic." Something crossed Koval's face that was close to a smile and didn't fully become one. He looked down at the bandage on his hand. "The debt," he said. He said it the way people say things they've been deciding whether to say. "I know. I paid it." He didn't look away. "Before I came here today. The loan, the interest, the full amount. It's cleared. The document in that envelope is cancelled. The building is clean." Vera stopped. "Then what was the check for?" "I needed to see what you'd do with it," Koval said. He held her eyes without flinching. 12 years of running operations, and I've met 2 kinds of people. People who take the money, and people who take longer to take the money. I needed to know which one you were before I asked you what I actually wanted to ask." The pipes knocked twice in the walls. Outside, the streetcar bell rang, distant and ordinary. "And what do you actually want to ask?" Vera said. She thought about it for 4 days. The first day she reorganized the type cases, sorting each letter back into its drawer the way her mother had taught her. Left to right, caps over lowercase, spacing material in the far left compartment. The second day she ran the menu order and 2 jobs she'd been putting off. The third day she sat at her mother's desk and opened the email with the cancellation documents attached, properly signed, properly filed, her debt reduced to 0, and read them twice. The fourth day she drove to Magazine Street. The building was a converted double shotgun, fully renovated in the way that meant it had been done once and wouldn't need doing again for 30 years. The sign on the door said Meriden Gallery in clean sans serif. The lights inside were on. She pushed the door open. Koval was at the far end of the empty gallery space, standing before a large blank wall with a level pressed against it. No coat. Sleeves rolled. He was checking a pencil line he'd drawn, completely absorbed in whether it was plumb, and he didn't hear her until she was most of the way across the bare floor. He turned. She looked at the level in his hand. She looked at the empty walls, the bare floors, the unfinished project of a man who ran a Gulf Coast syndicate, standing in his own gallery, checking the plumb on a picture rail. "You let me believe the debt was still active," she said, "when you came in." "Yes. You needed to know if I'd sell myself to clear it." "I needed to know if you were afraid of me," Koval said. "Those aren't the same question." Vera looked at the empty room around her. She thought about her mother's handwriting on the loan paperwork, careful even when the hand was already unsteady. She thought about a 15-year-old making a calculation about how to survive, and what it cost to maintain that calculation for 25 years. "This gallery is real," she said, "not a front." "It will be. That depends on finding someone who can read the difference between a real operation and a cleaned one. Someone who does the actual math, where the money is going, what it's touching, what it's legitimately building, and what it's hiding." He set the level down on the floor. "I have accountants, lawyers who charge $400 an hour to tell me what I want to hear. I need someone who slides a check back across a table and tells me what my leverage actually is." "I'm not a criminal," Vera said. "I'm not going to help you conceal anything." "I know," Koval said. "I need someone to help me stop concealing things. There's a difference, and I need someone who knows what that difference looks like on a balance sheet." The November light came through the front windows of the empty gallery and lay across the bare floors like something still being considered. Vera looked at the pencil line on the wall. She could see from where she was standing that it was level, exactly. Whatever Koval was, he was precise. "I'm going to need to see everything," she said. "Every account, every transaction. The real books, not the version your lawyers see. If there are things you've been told not to worry about, those are the first things I look at. Any number I can't verify is a number you're not actually trusting me with, and I don't work for people who don't actually trust me." Koval held her gaze for a long moment. Then he reached into his jacket pocket and set a key on the windowsill between them. "Filing room is through the back," he said. "Recent ledgers are in the left cabinet. The ones I've been told not to worry about are in the right." His eyes didn't leave hers. "Start wherever you need to." Vera looked at the key. She thought about her mother's filing cabinet, the paperwork she'd found behind the 2019 tax returns, the number she'd carried in her chest for 8 months. She thought about the Chandler and Price at home, still running, the ink she'd never fully get out of her hands. She picked the key up. It was heavier than a key that size should have been. Or maybe that was just the specific weight of a decision that couldn't be set down once you'd picked it up. She walked toward the back of the gallery. Behind her, she heard Koval retrieve the level from the floor, and then the soft sound of him checking the wall again. Still exact, still at it, still unwilling to leave something crooked when he had the tools to make it right.